Kemi's Tesfazghi, who is the private sector. She's the technical advisor at PSI Cambodia. I should know this. It was my job before she arrived there. I'm thrilled to welcome her up to talk about some of the experiences that PSI has had when engaging with the private sector across 4 different countries in the GMS, and I'm sure she's going to share some lesson learned, some challenges, some opportunities, and hopefully some progress since I left. So welcome, Kemi. Please come up.
Thank you, Abby, and thank you everyone for being here just before the Halloween celebrations. So as Abby said, I'll be talking about worksite dynamics, so going through some of our experiences in 4 countries in the Greater Mekong sub-region. So at the inception of the PSI Worksite program, our overwhelming question was how can we effectively provide free quality malaria case management to mobile migrant populations. Mobile migrant populations because the presumed risk was that those who were most at risk of malaria were 15 to 49-year-old men. They moved in and out of areas of endemicity internationally and within their countries. There was proximity to high areas of high transmission, so for us, low understanding of malaria, low net use, and low access to healthcare. So the big bet in 2013 was that we knew that mobile plantation workers were known as high-risk populations. So the idea was set up services on work sites and then you can effectively target them. So I'll walk you through what we refer to as the Cambodia model, which is how we set up work sites in Cambodia. These are 3 broad steps that disguise a lot of activities that go into the process of setting up work sites. But the first is to identify, map, select these private plantations. And in Cambodia, we did that by mapping over 1,400 plantations. Then we went and engaged them, set up services on the plantations. And by setting up services, I mean the second step where you recruit, you train the volunteers, and then you provide them access to quality assured ACTs and RDTs, and then you establish routine systems for them to report into the system. So here's a chart showing the caseload on the Cambodia work sites between 2013 and 2018. So we see that in the early days around 2013 and 2014, we were having positivity rates of about 20-30%. So the conclusions drawn at that time was, great, this is working. We should replicate in other countries. We should beef up our testing in Cambodia and expand the network. So in Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam, we tried to do that. In Myanmar, we mapped close to 2,000 work sites and then engaged over 160 work sites. So here, the Myanmar model followed the Cambodia model, having somebody on site to provide services. But in Laos and Vietnam, from the onset, things were slightly different. So the way in which they mapped, in Laos, they mapped more focused group of work sites, and in Vietnam, they listed over 12,000 initially. And then engaging work sites in Laos, it was about 16, and in Vietnam, it was about 25. I'll come back to the way engage means in Laos and Vietnam a little bit later. For now, I want to turn to the data from Myanmar. So this graph is a little bit different from the graph I showed you from Cambodia. In Myanmar, the channels in which PSI supports case management and access to populations at risk are more than the others. So here we have non-formal providers, so your drug vendors and like sundry shops. You have community providers. You have clinics, so like pharmacists and clinicians. And then you also have work sites. So PSI supports all these channels to provide quality case management of malaria. And you'll notice that in this, comparatively, the work sites were seeing less positivity rates than the other channels. So the question for PSI Myanmar is then, does this continue to make sense for them to reach at-risk populations? And it's something that they've been reviewing over the course of this year and will be making decisions on shortly. So going to Vietnam and Laos. So remember I said that the way we engaged in Vietnam and Laos was slightly different. So before they set up a Cambodia type model, they decided to screen, do mass screening on the work sites they had identified. And in Vietnam, they screened close to 700 people. In Laos, over 1,000 people. And in both cases, they only found about 2 cases each. So based on that and what they were seeing from the other countries, they decided, well, it doesn't make sense in this context to set up the Cambodia or the Myanmar type model. We can, especially that they had other ways to reach the populations at risk. They decided that it didn't make sense in that context. So going back to Cambodia now, our question was then how, if positivity rates are declining, even though we're making efforts to test people, how can we improve case detection? So this slide shows you a range of activities and strategies we've employed to try and boost that case detection. We did mass screening coupled with deworming. We did contact tracing, which is reactive case detection. We did on-site modifications by changing profiles of the volunteers, all in a bid to try and get people to come and be tested and to better identify the cases. But as you saw, the positivity rates were not as good as we had expected that they would be. So this causes us to pause and think. Why are there so few cases on work sites? So we walked ourselves through 3 questions. Are plantation workers no longer at risk? Is there no more malaria present in those areas? Or are there cases but they're seeking care in other channels? To the first question, who's at risk of malaria? The 2 donuts show data from Vietnam and Cambodia where we're able to determine the occupation of positive cases. And you see that overwhelmingly it's forest workers. So it's still the forest workers that were at risk. And then the other thing is that there's a heterogeneity amongst the positive malaria cases. Before we had the catch-all phrase of MMPs and providing services to MMP. But I'm a Nigerian living in Cambodia. I'm an MMP, but I'm not at risk of malaria. So we realized that we needed to start taking a closer look of who's at risk and meeting their needs. So the forest worker may or may not be on the plantation. Turning now to the second and third question. Here is a map. Just bear with me because it's not that complicated, but it takes a bit of explaining. So here, the map on the left is a heat map where community volunteers from Myanmar identify positive cases. So the sort of top corner is, areas where they're identifying a relative large amount of cases. The green dots are work sites that we support, but they're not identifying any cases. And then the same thing for the map on the right, where at the bottom you have the non-formal sector identifying a large number of positive cases, but you have plantations in the same areas not identifying any cases. So this leads us to believe that it's unlikely that the issue is that there are no malaria cases, but more likely that there are cases, but they're seeking care in other channels. This conclusion is even more stark when you look at the Cambodia data. The 2 green circles are work sites that reported no cases in 2017, and they're within a 3-kilometer radius from each other. And right in the middle of those 2 work sites, so the sort of tiny blurry red cross, is a PPM provider that PSI supports who reported a substantial amount of cases, so in our context, 52 in 2017. So this caused us to look at where our work sites were and where our services were in relation to the population at risk, in relation to the forest goers. It led us to identify some gaps in where we were placing our services. So the bottom is the bottom orange sort of background is a schematic depicting a PSI work site. So you have your work site volunteer, you have the families and the workers on the work site, and they are getting access to treatment. But then you have settlements who are closer to the forest, some of them actually in the forest, and they come in and out of the work. So workers go in and out of the work sites into the forest. Those people who live in the forest may not, one, they may not know about the PSI volunteer. Two, they may not have access to the work site. So where we thought we were bringing care closer to the population at risk, we had lost sight of the fact that the risk factor is the forest-related activity and not their residence on the work sites. In 2018, we decided to start understanding the target population a bit better, so those forest workers. And we carried out, we went through a process called EIP, so that's empathy, insights, and prototyping. It's a PSI developed methodology that has roots in human-centered design, so kind of a participatory action learning. We identified forest workers and took them through, collected data using 3 tools. The first tool is an empathy map. So with the forest workers, we went through a process of identifying what they think and they feel in relation to malaria, what they hear, what they say and do, and what they see. The second tool is a heat map or a circle of trust. So with the forest worker or the forest girl, we go through a process of identifying who they trust in relation to in terms of information in relation to malaria. Wives did not feature very close to the middle, but and then the last one is a day in the life of, so it's a journey map. So we presented 2 scenarios where the forest guard walked us through what they did from the time they woke up to the time they went to bed. And the one scenario is for a day, the forest worker goes into the forest and spends the night, and another scenario is when they don't spend the night in the forest and they spend it in the community. We took all this data back, and then we had an analysis workshop in collaboration with community leaders from those forest-going communities. So with the insights and the conclusions from the data we collected and the analysis, we developed prototypes. So prototypes of interventions. We developed 3 prototypes, one that had to do with improving access, one that had to do with peer education and information on prevention, and one that had to do with building community engagement and spirit in relation to tackling malaria. So the picture is, pardon me. The picture is of a story, is of one of our colleagues, storyboarding. So they draw the intervention, a pictorial of the intervention, and they use that to explain to the community what it is. The next step was taking these prototypes into the communities and carrying out consultations. So we went to the communities, we discussed it with them, and what we found was that we had these 3 separate ideas, right, and we presented it to the communities, and they were saying, oh, access is great, but we kind of need information. And then when we go to another one and we'll be talking about information, information is great, but it won't work without proper access. Or they would say, oh, but we want to be involved in who is going to provide us case management. So there was a real appetite for being involved in the process, for designing the interventions that would serve their needs better. So taking all that feedback back, we combined the 3 ideas into one, which is community-led initiatives for malaria elimination, which has components of the access, the components of the peer education, and components of the sort of community engagement and community spirit to tackle malaria elimination. Since then, we've gone back with this sort of one super idea to do further consultations, and the aim is to pilot this in 2019. I want to leave you with 3 takeaways, which I'm going to frame in the words of a book from Dr. Spencer Johnson, Who Moved My Cheese? The first one is to anticipate the need for constant iteration. Expect that the cheese is going to move. who the populations at risk are, where they go, what they do. It's going to be constantly changing, and you have to be aware of that, prepared for that, and ready to move and have differentiated strategies across countries. The second one is the quicker you let go of the old cheese, the quicker you can enjoy the new cheese. So you have to adapt to change quickly, right? What do you do when your data is telling you that you're failing? I found that I have to learn to fail faster, right? I have to move on from an idea when the data is telling me that it's not working and try and engage and find new opportunities to reach the people at risk. And that's a bold thing, I suppose, to say in a scientific community where you want a trial and you want the data, but we can't afford to wait for typical donor circles or, implementing things we know are not working because we put them in the work plan 18 months ago. And we've been incredibly lucky because the Gates Foundation that funds this project has been really, really flexible in allowing us to respond to the data in this dynamic and flexible way. And then the last thing is to smell the cheese often. You have to monitor change. You have to keep your finger on the pulse. And in PSI, we've been good at looking at the numbers. What we're learning to do now is the other side of the numbers, the people behind those numbers, understand what they're doing, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, in ways that have sometimes nothing to do with malaria, but in ways that will impact the work that we're going to do. If we don't understand what drives them and where that drive is likely to take them, we won't be able to access them and provide the services that they need. Thank you very much.
Anybody who has questions, please come on up to the front. Sure.
Thank you for the presentation. I did enjoy your EIP workshop. But before that, I have a question. You asked 3 questions about why the case was so low. So I'd like to ask the 4th question. What tool did you use? What diagnostic tools do you use? I know that in this circumstances, maybe you need to use some kind of ultra sensitivity tool. So just like to understand this. Thank you.
So that's a great question, and one we've debated for quite a while. So we use standard RDTs, not hypersensitive RDTs in this context, and it's something that we continue to debate with our technical director.
Any other questions, please?
Thank you for the talk. Just my question is that you identified some work sites which are really private enterprises. So what were the input of the private plantation for this activity? Because I'm really interested just to come to this one to see how private-public partnership is working. That is really, I like just to learn here. So what did they do? You identified so many work sites, you do your way, you engage the community. What did really the plantation owners or the factory, whatever you call it over there, I don't know there, what do they do? Where is the private-public partnership? How do they take the ownership so that they can really care about the elimination of malaria? Not only you, those who are really doing that great plantation. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really good question. I mean, to date, the involvement of the plantation owners is really key. I outlined in more detail in my last presentation the way we go about engaging them, and the volunteers on the work sites are full-time workers. So even allowing them to be paid their full-time wage, but still give services to people who have malaria and have fever is a commitment. Is a commitment that we get from them.
Great, thanks, Kemi.